Well, I'm Diana Wells and I'm a photographic artist, and I'm also a graphic designer and owner and director of my own company, Diana Wells Design. I brought in a catalogue called Poster Art in Australia, which was produced in the 80s, late 80s. I've forgotten when. It was actually curated by Roger Butler, who is the curator of prints and drawings at the National Gallery of Australia. And in the catalogue is a poster that I designed in 1988 called Kanaki Free and Independent. And it was a screen-printed a lino cut, which I actually transformed into a screen print, I guess. And I brought it in because I believe it's the first time, because I had a printmaking background from the Canberra School of Art, I believe it was the first time that I felt it was a resolved piece as a graphic designer, but with my fine art background clearly evident in the work. And it came about because I was working for an organisation called Another Planet Posters, and we were a collective of screen printers, and most of us came out of art school, not all of us, but most, and we were producing posters for people from disadvantaged backgrounds and not your normal client, I guess, that you would normally associate a graphic design company working with, but we worked with housing groups and Indigenous groups, disabled groups, etc. And this poster came about because in 1988 was the bicentenary of Australia, and the Australia Council were providing funds for groups to apply for money to produce posters to do with the bicentenary. We decided we'd like to do some work about Indigenous groups at the time, rather than focusing on Australia as a white coming from a white colonial power. We thought we will focus on the Indigenous Australians. I chose the Kanaks of New Caledonia, who were fighting for independence, and they were sort of bringing up this campaign again in about 84. And the French government, who control their land, were busy doing nuclear testing in the Pacific around Mururoa Atoll. And so the Kanaks felt that the only way they were going to get rid of this was to become independent, but I believe they're still fighting for this cause. However, I chose a fish as a symbol of independence and peace, I guess, at the time, in a very sort of tropical environment. It has got English and French typography type describing the poster, so that really explains my introduction into graphic design in a slightly different way to what most people would. Yes, I think it definitely came from my time at Canberra School of Art, where there was a lot of artists interested in social issues at the time, and screen printing and posters was a very cheap way at the time of producing posters about issues that people felt were important at the time. So poster making really took off in Australia in about the 70s and 80s, and I was on that ride for a while. I worked at Another Planet Posters for 5 years, and I always thought it was important to have something to say. At the same time, I did set up the commercial end of Another Planet Posters, so we did set up a business end because we couldn't rely on government funding all of the time. So I set that up, and that's been my interest in actually charging a fee for service came about, but still working with people that were interesting, that were creative, or had social issues they wanted to discuss. So a housing organisation for disabled people, I remember doing a poster for that, which was absolutely beautiful. It was screen printed, and it was about providing a house for people no matter what their situation was. It was about fairness and about equality, and those sort of things really interested me. So we had a little computer which we bought at Another Planet. It was one of those first Apple Macs, was about that big. I can't remember the name of it, but it was very exciting to get that piece of equipment and move into the technological world. And I remember it was one of those ones when you turned it on, the little face came on. It was very cute. So that was exciting because before that time we were using Letraset and Letraset, I think, from memory. It was all very hand, or we'd get a typeset. I think there was some hot metal. I can't remember even how it was done. So yes, I moved into that sort of whole technological, computerised world. I suppose, interestingly, when I went for my first job as a graphic designer, it was with the City of Melbourne. They had quite a large design department at the time. And the reason why they employed me was they really thought my work was very interesting, and it was very different to someone that might have come out of design school. But I learnt a lot because I was working with students, they weren't students, they were employees who had all graduated from graphic design colleges. So I learnt something, they learnt something. There was this sort of nice kind of synergy going on. So I was able to move into a more commercial world. However, still working for a local council, as good as the City of Melbourne was, we worked on some amazing projects, which was the Melbourne City Walk, Swanston Walk was developed. Postcode 3000 was another inner city living project which I worked on. So they were, again, really, really interesting jobs. Yes, so I set up my business in the early 90s, around 1990, and I, again, developed a clientele based on the sort of people I'd been working with in Another Planet and the City of Melbourne. So one of my very successful projects, I think in about 2004 actually, was the brand logo type for Art Play, which was a children's art making facility down on Birrarung Ma, and it's still there. So what I did was, and I think one of the strengths of my practice is working collaboratively. So I was commissioned to run a series of workshops with children from the North Melbourne Primary School, and it was because they really wanted their involvement in the creation of the brand. So I had to sort of work with one child was 6 years old and up to about sort of 10, I think. And I was kind of shocked at how uptight they were, and it was really all about trying to get them to express what making art was about, and creativity, expression, and partnerships, and working together. So I ran those workshops, and we did a series of lino cuts. And one child in particular, who was only 6, was a fabulous creative child who just did these wonderful letter forms, which were sort of squiggling all over the place and had beautiful flow. And so we then, I was working with a designer at the time called Morris Costoon. He was working for me, and Morris is a fabulous typographer, and he then worked up the letter forms into what it represents today, which is a lovely fluid brand. And he then went on to, I shouldn't be talking about Morris, but he did then go on to actually produce it as a commercial typeface. It's called Morris, so it's available. You can buy it. Anyway, enough about him, but he was terrific to work with. I loved working with him. So I guess I need to acknowledge that all my work has been produced with other people, and particularly other designers. So I'm never working alone. I suppose I've always seen myself as a bit of an art director in a way, and work collaboratively with these other younger designers. So that's worked well for me. I think that the content of the material for me is very important. So another project I can think of is Ninkanunu Art and Culture Centre in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory. And I worked with an artist, Alison Alder, who's also an accomplished designer and screen printer herself. She worked at Redback Graphics. She was working up there as a kind of working with the Indigenous community, helping them produce posters and self-portraits and other forms of artwork, screen-printed scarves and things like that. So she got me involved, and it was, again, without that collaboration with those people, with the Indigenous people, and the beautiful series of portraits that she produced with them, the work would kind of be nothing. It would be empty. I mean, and I guess my work for that, again, I was working with Morris. I have to acknowledge him. The work was very much in keeping with the aesthetic of those people, and very much giving them a voice to their expression. So I think as a graphic designers, we were collating all their material, which is a lot of bits and pieces really. It was about all their language, about their skin system, about their bush foods they ate. So there was quite a lot of disparate kind of mark making, I guess you could call it, from photography to portraits and little three-dimensional dioramas they made. So it was our job to sort of pull it all together and give it an expression and a form which was clear, and about clear communication, and but without losing sight of their voice. So we were the conduit to bring it all together, I suppose. Well, I love photography, so I look at a lot of photographic people and the history of photography, particularly American photographers. I'm really interested in, particularly social people that have been interested in the social aspect, like Walker Evans and his farm security. I've forgotten the exact. It was in the 1930s when the Depression was on in America, and he went and worked with a writer. They went to Oklahoma, the Oklahoma area that was very affected by a drought, but also the Depression. So I think the work they did together in actually documenting that situation, plus the photography, and then making it into a book, which I can't remember the exact title of the book, but it was a very famous book. I like that collaborative process they had. I've also liked artists like Ed Ruscha, who is a painter, but he also worked as a commercial artist in the 70s, I think, 60s, 70s. His paintings and his photography are very graphic, and they reference a sense of graphic design which came directly out of his work as a commercial artist. They used to call it commercial art back then. Now it would be called graphic design, I suppose. But his work really references that things like gas stations and the Hollywood neon sign in Hollywood. He's actually incorporated that into a lot of his artwork, and I find that interesting, that sort of dynamic between the two forms, art making and photography and graphic design. I think is really interesting. I don't think many students are aware of the power, absolutely. I could actually flick to a couple of pages in here of Australian designers, particularly there were a number of wonderful designers. This is actually Norman Lindsay, who was producing posters about the war effort. I can't exactly see what year that was, but I can tell you afterwards. And there was also wonderful Australian designers working on promoting Australia as a destination to travel to in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So I don't think many young Australians would necessarily be aware of this work. It's an absolutely fantastic resource. And most of these posters have been collected. All of these posters are in the National Gallery of Australia, and I know a lot are in the State Library, particularly the one here in Melbourne. They have a huge collection of Australian posters. I also think the social graphics of the 1970s, particularly the work of Martin Sharp, was important. But also there was a lot of women graphic design as well, like Mandy Martin, Anne Newmarsh, Tony Robinson. They were Australian designers who were producing posters about more social issues in the 70s and into the 80s, yes. I think that a fantastic resource for students to look into, because it's probably an area they're not aware of. Well, I feel that it's very important to become visible if you want to make, I guess do better work or stay connected with people and not feel so isolated in the industry. So I think there's definitely a benefit in getting involved in groups like, for instance, the Australian Graphic Design Association, which I did around 2003 or 4, I think, maybe 5. Around then, I became involved with the awards process. Even though I wasn't actually in the awards myself, I got involved with the organisational committee, and the benefits of that was I had a real insight. I had met a lot of other designers who were working at the time. Fiona Sweet was one, Michaela from Studio Round, other women who were making a significant contribution at the time, and then there were David Pidgeon was the chair, and Andrew Ashton was also involved. So there were some great people. And I was able to share ideas about how they developed their own businesses, and we were able to share backwards and forwards. So I think that was the time. That was pivotal in actually raising awareness about how to present my work and how to prepare my work professionally for instance, the AGDRA Awards. So after I got an insight into how they were doing it, it actually enabled me to lift my profile more and to actually present my work more professionally for the AGDRA Awards, and it was after that experience that actually I did get in. So I think that year we had maybe 3 or 4 pieces which were either had distinctions or were just finalists in the award. So made a big difference to me. And the only way you can really, but for me, the way I lifted my profile was to actually network a lot more and to talk with these people and learn from the way they did it. So visibility is huge, I think. And putting yourself out there. I would describe myself as an extremely shy person, really shy, and I made myself do it. I thought, I cannot just continue to stick in this silly little vacuum, which it's not silly, but I felt too isolated. I really stuck my neck out, and I think I was friends with David, and we used to see each other a bit socially, so that's how it sort of came about. He asked some of his friends to get involved with AGTA. So I think you have to make yourself get involved, even though it's kind of feels scary at certain times, to have a voice, speak up, and don't feel like an idiot by speaking up, because it's the only way really to get that sort of exposure is to get involved and to mix and to network. And then results happen. They do. Yes, I've always had a fairly simple website. I've never spent a lot of money on my website. However, I think I've had 3 different iterations of it. The latest one really does show a lot of my work of the last probably 10 to 15 years, and I think it's important to keep some of the older work on there as well, because it shows the breadth of your career, and also that you can work with, it's not just about the latest thing. I've noticed that a lot of websites these days only really show what they've done. It's very much about the now, and I believe that it's important to show the now, but also the breadth of what you've been able to produce over a number of years. And also because a lot of other younger designers get credit for their work on my site. I've had about 8 employees, I think, so they're all credited on the website. It also acknowledges the contribution they've made, and that they can also refer to the website if they want other designers to see their work as well. So it's not just about me. But I think that, yes, I certainly became a lot more visible. And people do refer to my site to see the work. And often when I'm asked to pitch for a job, they say, well, we've seen your work on your website and we can see that you work with these people and you have worked with these people. So for me, I think it's very important for visibility. Mm. Yes, well, I'm working on a project right now which is called Boundaries. And it's a project I'm working on with a writer called Sophie Cunningham. And she's been a publisher for about 20 years, but she's now moving into more personal writings about place and walking in environments. And so we applied for a City of Melbourne grant and were successful. She's writing an 8,000-word essay about the municipal boundary of the City of Melbourne, and we're walking on and off the 70 kilometres around that boundary. My role is to take fine art photographs of what I find on that boundary, and it's a range of things like industrial areas, freeway areas with creeks running underneath, like the Moonee Ponds Creek, and under that creek are self-sown river red gums that just flow down from the outside of Melbourne and down into the centre of the city. I find that really interesting, that those areas of rejuvenation are happening when no one's planting them. They just grow, which is fascinating. And then sort of areas around the casino and South Bank, and there's a marvellous history of Melbourne around that inner area. But I am actually we'll be designing a little book as well. So it's a great it's a great way for me to produce my photographs, but also to work as a designer as well. So I will be designing a little book with Sophie's written piece and my photographs. So a true collaboration of all of my aspects of what I do, I think. Yes, I did a research master's at Monash University, and I decided to look at the outer urban edge of Melbourne, where the country is disappearing and more and more housing estates are being built. So I spent 3 years, I think, wandering that urban edge, particularly on places like Epping and Wallet and Wyndham Vale, looking for remnants of bushland and creeks, and then the merging of the disappearance of that and the encroachment of the built form. So I found that, and I was trying to find that point of interaction, and I found it and produced a body of work on that. And so the current project I'm working on called Boundaries is actually bringing it in to the inner city, and I'm using my facilities, my skills as a designer as well to bring it together into fruition as a project. So I've exhibited my work in a number of exhibitions, and I'm now working on a body of work about introduced species in national parks. And I hope to produce a book, a published book with the photographs and some text as well. It's called Primitive Settlers.